The pale light of a winter dawn spilled across the dirt road, brushing the frost with silver. A girl walked there alone, barefoot, her hem torn and stiff with cold, her cheeks blotched with shame. Clara Mayfield, 18. One hand clutched her belly as though it might fall if she didn't hold it. The other hung limp at her side. Behind her, the door of the Mayfield farmhouse still swung open from the violence that had flung her through it. I remember that morning. I remember the sound her body made hitting the frozen ground, softer than a man's cruelty, yet louder than the wind. Only an hour earlier, she had stood in the kitchen, trembling. Her father, Thomas Mayfield, a ranch hand with whiskey in his blood and pride in his fists, had found out. It wasn't a child to him. It was a shame. No daughter of mine will shame this house. He spat, his voice low and shaking, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Then the boot came, driving into her ribs, and his hand followed, shoving her out into the icy dark. Her mother, Evelyn, had stood in the doorway, tears gathering but not falling, her lips locked tight. She'd learned long ago that speaking only earned another bruise. So Clara stepped into the cold with nothing but the clothes she wore and the heartbeat inside her. She limped toward town as the sun crawled over the horizon. The women on porches folded their arms and stared, their eyes stripping her down to the bone. Men lowered their hats, but not out of respect. More like the lowering of a curtain on something shameful. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, their mothers pulling them back inside. The wind carried words sharper than knives. She brought on herself. Ain't no man gonna claim her now. Clara felt each one land in her skin. By the time she reached the mercantile, her knees ached and her breath came in clouds. That's when she heard hoofbeats. Slow, steady, unhurried. She turned her head and saw him, Luke Calder, a rancher with dust in his coat seams and a kind of quiet in his eyes that didn't belong to this hard land. He reined his horse beside her, but didn't speak right away. Just looked. She kept her gaze low. I ain't beggin', she muttered. He noticed the bruise blooming purple along her jaw, the way her palm rested over her belly without thought. From across the street, a door slammed, and Thomas came striding into view, shouting her name. The sound made her flinch. Luke stepped down from the saddle and put himself between them. Thomas's boots hit the street hard. She's coming home. He reached for her arm. Luke's revolver was out before the hand landed, the barrel steady and unshaking, his voice even. You lay one more hand on her, and you'll be picking splinters from the coffin I put you in. The crowd drew closer, their murmurs swelling like the tide. Thomas stared, his jaw working, then spat in the dirt. He turned and walked away, but his eyes promised it wasn't the end. Luke turned back to Clara. He didn't touch her much, just enough to help her onto his horse. The ride out of town was quiet. She rested her cheek against the worn leather of his saddle, listening to the steady breath of the horse beneath them. Snow began to fall, soft and slow, dusting her hair and his shoulders. His ranch was nothing fancy. Weatherboards, a thin chimney breathing smoke, but inside, the fire burned steady, and a kettle sang low on the stove. He set food on the table before asking any questions. Clara ate like someone who'd forgotten what kindness tasted like. When he offered her a bed, she shook her head and curled up in a chair instead. The wind rattled the shutters while Luke mended a bridle at the table, not looking at her, yet not letting her be alone in the silence. The days slid past in quiet routine. Luke left food by her place at the table without asking if she wanted it. He repaired her torn dress, his stitches clumsy but careful. One night, she woke to find a quilt over her shoulders, its weight and warmth like an unspoken word. She began to notice the way her shoulders eased when he was near, the way shame loosened its grip without her noticing. A week later, hoofbeats broke the quiet again. Thomas rode up with two other men, their faces hard. She's coming home, Thomas said, his voice full of threat. Luke met them in the yard, his coat open, his revolver resting easy in his hand. Words passed between them like drawn knives. The other men left first, muttering. Thomas stayed a moment longer, his glare hot, but Luke's cold stare didn't waver. Finally, Thomas turned his horse and rode away into the snow. Clara watched from the window until her father disappeared over the ridge. The ache in her chest was no longer fear. It was something steadier, the beginning of self-worth. She told Luke she'd work to earn her keep. He only nodded, but the faint glimmer in his eyes said more than any words could. By the time spring came, the air had softened, carrying the smell of grass instead of frost. Clara worked in the corral, heavy with child but smiling, her sleeves rolled up, hair loose in the breeze. Luke stood at the gate, watching her with the quiet attention of a man guarding something precious. Not because it was fragile, but because it had become its own strength. The town still whispered, but she walked through it with her head high. There are folks who will mark you by the weight of your sins, and folks who will measure you by the weight you can carry. If you find the latter, hold on. Sometimes, they're the only bridge between the girl you were and the woman you become.